Okay, and welcome to lesson 3 of PhatKids. This is a tutorial on a tower defense game. And this tower defense game so far we'll go ahead and look in the main document class. We have basically just put on some rectangles, game area, menu area, and set game info area. And then we've added an event listener to init the enemy. If I were to run the program right now, it doesn't run, and so we're going to go ahead and make a few changes. We are going to add to this a couple of things. We're going to add a game area mask. Actually, here's the program running. When I run the program, the ships are just flying randomly. You'll notice the ships fly out of this main rectangle. This big rectangle is called the game area rectangle. And so I've created a function that says game area, or a public variable called GA for game area. And then in the main constructor function, I set game area. I call a function called set game area, and that creates, instantiates a instance of game area, sets the x and the y coordinates of game area. The upper left-hand corner of that is going to have coordinates of 100 and 0. The alpha is set at 0.9, and add child at. And I put it at 0, and I'll explain why later on. Now, one of the things that I changed from the last lesson is that I changed the name of this function. I have an event listener in the main constructor listening for a frame, an enter frame event. When I enter a frame, instead of calling update enemy, I'm going to call init enemy. And the reason I changed the name from an update to init is that in the enemy class itself, I have called that function update enemy, so it seemed confusing. So I initialize the enemy here, and then I'll update it inside the enemy itself. In any case, at this point, what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and place the turret. I'll go ahead and call a function called place turret, and I'm going to place a turret on the stage. And to do that, I'll come right in here, and the same way, same thing I did before, I'll go ahead and create a function. Actually, yeah, we'll create a function, and we'll call this function place turret. And this function will not have an input parameter, nor will it have a return value, so I can have void there. And the key things I want to do is I want to instantiate this. And so I'm going to say T is of type turret. Or actually, I'm just going to say T equals new turret. And even before I do that, way up here on top where it says variable, I need to declare this. So I'll say variable T is of type turret. And so in between the class and the constructor function, I've created my, let's say, global variables, and these variables can be actually instantiated inside the functions down below. So that's the pattern I'm using on all the variables that I'm doing so far. So t, I've got to set the x and the y coordinates, so I'm going to say t.x is equal to, and I want to say t.y is equal to. And since this guy is going to appear on or inside the game area, I'll go ahead and use the coordinates of the game area. So I'll go ahead and say ga.width to find my x coordinate, and I'll just go ahead and cut that in half, and that will give me my x coordinate. My y coordinate is going to be ga.height, and I don't want it to be the full height, so I'll subtract from that 40, and then I need to add that to the stage. So I'll just go ahead and say add child, and I'm going to go ahead and add him, add T. So let's see what happens now. If I run this, T appears on the stage, and 40 units. I came all the way down to the bottom horizontally and came back 40, and came all the way over here and took half of that. So that's the x and the y location of my turret. All right, now I'm going to add something else down here. After I have added my game area, GA, I'm going to add something that's going to be a mask. I'm going to create a function that will create a mask whenever I call it, and it's going to return a sprite. Now the mask is going to allow anything within the mask area to be seen. When it goes outside of the mask area, it won't be seen. So in effect, this function, I'll go ahead and make it public. And I'll go ahead and say, let's say the function is called create game area mask. So create game area mask, and it won't take an input parameter, but it will return a sprite. And the reason for that is because when I call this from, I can set the mask property of any movie clip to be equal to this value. And when it returns a sprite, my bullet or my turret or my enemy will only be seen within the confines of the mask. So I'll create a variable here, and I'll create a variable, I'll call the variable game area mask. And this will be a sprite, and I will have to instantiate it by saying, using the keyword new and saying sprite with parentheses. And so now I've got a new sprite, and I've called it game area mask. All I have to do now is locate it, and I'll actually create a rectangle and fill it to establish my mask. So I'll say game area, area mask dot graphics. And I'm going to do this 3 times, so I'll go ahead and copy this right now. I'm going to do, I'll begin the rectangle, I'll fill the rectangle, and then I'll end the rectangle, which is pretty standard for graphics or creating your own graphics in ActionScript. So I'll start with begin fill, and then I'll come down to draw rect. Whoops. Okay, and then I will finish with end fill. And so these are my 3 functions that I'm going to have to call every time I create a polygon or a rectangle in this case. And I have some parameters in here. I'm going to go ahead and give it a color. So that's going to be OX, and I'll use the hexadecimal value for, you know what, it really doesn't matter what you use. You can use 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, or let's say I'll take FF, and I'm going to set the alpha quality to 1. So that's done. Now the dimensions, what this graphics draw rect needs are the dimensions or the location of the upper left-hand point of the rectangle and the lower right-hand. So anytime you draw a rectangle, you need 4 values: the x and y coordinates of the upper left corner and the x and y coordinates of the lower lower right. And so we want this to be exactly the same size as the game area. So I'm going to say ga.x and ga.y. That's the upper left-hand corner. And the lower right-hand corner, it's going to have the same dimensions as the game area. So I'll just say ga.width, and I'll say ga.height. Okay, so that's good. Now that guy should give me a rectangle, a sprite, and return the sprite. So I just have to say now, return game area mask. And the way that I use this is when I create, let's say, my enemy. So here's my enemy. Right before I add him to the stage, I will say enemy, and I will say dot mask equals create. I'm calling the function now, create game area mask. So I call the function and I use my parentheses. And now when I call this function, I'll come down here, I'll run this function, create game area mask. It will create the variable game area mask. It will create that rectangle. It will fill it. It will cause its dimensions. It's going to return that as a sprite, and I say enemy.mask. Now the reason the enemy knows what a mask is because way up here, or actually when I created my enemy class, let's go ahead and open my enemy class for a minute. If I look at my enemy class extends movie clip. And when the class, since this class extends movie clip, the enemy gets everything that a movie clip has, which includes the mask property. All right, so if that's done correctly, let's see if this works. I'll go ahead and hit run. I've got a bunch of errors. So let's go ahead and see. It doesn't know what game area mask is. Did I spell it? Oh, I didn't spell it correctly. about 90% of my errors are misspellings. And I've got one more error now, and it says game area mask, graphics. Oh, and this should say end fill. Didn't know what end is. So I'll try that again now. And now it runs, and when the ships go off the edge, off the edge of the rectangle, they simply disappear. They don't go over the menu or the other areas. So that works. So anything I have, bullets, the turrets, the enemies, I can just go ahead and use this one line of code. Whatever the object is, use .mask equals, and I set game area mask. I think I'll do that for the turret, although it won't actually make any difference at this point, but I can do that right here. I can say t dot create game area or mask rather, and then I say equals create game area mask. And so if at any point the turret were to go out of that rectangle, we would no longer be able to see it. And so let's see that. It's still there. Now the turret's not doing anything, and so that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to go ahead and create the turret class. So the turret exists right now only in the library. So let's go to the library and see the turret. The turret's right here. And if I want to add a class, an action script class, what I do is I go to turret. If this is not shown, I hit the advanced button and I make sure I click on this, which will give me the class turret. So the name in the library is turret, the name of the class is turret. When I click the pencil, I go into this file. Notice it's entitled script1, but if I hit Control S, it will automatically save it in the same folder as the other classes with the proper name. So the name of the class is turret, the name of the file rather is turret, the name of the class is turret, the name of the function is turret as well. So this is my constructor function. I'm going to go ahead and do some things with this right now. I'm going to add an event listener, and the event listener is going to be added to the turret, and it will listen for the typical event enter frame. And so every time I enter a frame, oops, I've got event and dot enter frame. So every time I enter the frame, I'm going to get this message, and I'll go ahead and call a function called, let's say, update turret. Let's be consistent here. And so I've got update turret. So what update turret is going to do is it's already been placed on the stage. And what I want to do with update turret is, first of all, make it follow the mouse. So just like we've done in previous tutorials, we're going to say public function, and we'll do update turret. And I will not return anything, so I'll say void here, but I do need to have an input parameter. Since this is being called from an event listener, I need to say EDT, and I'll have this be an event. So it's accepting a parameter. I don't know that we're going to use it, but it's there. Since the event listener is calling it, I have to receive it here, and whatever I have here for event, have to have the same thing up here. So whatever I have here, rather, I have to have the same thing down here. Okay, so we've already done this in the past, but we've got variable, and I'm going to we're going to use arctangent to find the angle between the turret and the mouse. To do that, I need to know the height and the, let's say, the horizontal and vertical values of that rectangle, because the tangent is the opposite over the adjacent. And so the arctangent, if I give the arctangent the value of the opposite and the adjacent, it's going to return the angle. Okay, so let's go ahead and find the length of each side of this triangle. We have dx, and that is going to be the difference between where the mouse is. Let's call that an int. The difference between where the mouse is, so I have mouse x, and I minus the location of the turret. And so since I'm in the turret, I can simply say this dot x. Okay, now that's not quite going to work because, I need an equal sign for one thing. But not only that, this will only work if the mouse is physically touching the turret. So this is the same as saying this, when I leave the this out, it's the same as saying this dot mouse x. But what I want is when the mouse is anywhere on the main stage. So since the turret is on the main stage, the parent of the turret is the stage. And so if I say parent.mousex, this will work anywhere on the main stage. And I'll do the same thing for the y values. So dx will be the vertical length, or let's say the opposite side of that triangle. dy will be the change in y, or the horizontal difference between the two. And that should about do it, I think. Okay, so that gives me dy and dx. Now I want to set the rotation of the turret, so I will say this dot rotation. Again, I'm working inside the turret. This dot rotation is equal to, and I'm going to call from the math class the arctan2, and there's two arctan functions. Arctan1 apparently has some problems, and so we just use arctan2. And arctan2, given the two sides, I input to this function the two sides of my triangle, and it will tell me the angle sort of between them. And so it takes the y coordinate, the y difference first, so I say dy, and then I say dx. Now, the problem with this is that this is going to give me a radian value, and I need degrees for rotation. So I have to do a conversion. When we use sine and cosine, back in the enemy class, we had to convert from degrees to radians. Now we're going to convert from radians to degrees, and so I divide, and this time math dot pi, and I multiply that by 180. In the other functions, or in the when we use sine and cosine, we did divided by 180 times math.pi. In any case, that should work. Let's see if it's working right now. And I have a bug event. Okay, this is another thing that comes up when you're using ActionScript files. It doesn't know what an event is. When we were putting code directly into the timeline, it knew. But now that I'm here, it doesn't, and so I just have to say events is my package, and I'm going to take in event. Notice all of that turned blue, and now when I run it, I have a mouse moving, and the turret follows the mouse. Okay, so that's good. One last thing I'm going to do is add another event listener, but I'll save that for the next video. Again, just to review what we did, we placed a turret on the stage, we instantiated it, found its x and y values, we added a mask, and then we added it to the stage. We took, after we set the game area, we have create game area mask, where we created a sprite, and we're returning that sprite. And in between, we created a rectangle. And the three functions we need are graphics begin fill, graphics draw rectangle, graphics end fill, with the parameters, the location, GAX, GAY, GA width, GA height. And then we added our turret class. That's it for today. Bye-bye.